Hello my dear friends, my name is Arith Herger and today I'm going to answer a question from one of my patrons, Mrs. Teresa. And I do believe Mr. Glenn Hallen also asked me this question. What are bards, shops and skalds, differences and their role in their specific cultures? Now, this is a Q&A video, so I'm going to answer that without delving too much on the subject, but still an extensive answer. So let's start with bards first. A bard was an entertainer and a storyteller that did countless numbers of activities for others' entertainment. He juggled, sang, played music, wrote poems, and so on. They also played huge roles in their societies that could range from being a teacher to being a warrior. And in the case of the shops of Anglo-Saxon England, some would have been knights. The bards come from the Celtic culture, and such a profession was maintained and endured for a very long time in the British Isles. Even William Shakespeare was considered a bard. History wasn't written back then, it wasn't recorded on a surface that would last for ages to come, so it was the bard's job to memorize historical events, great deeds of renowned heroes of old and from their own times. The bard was employed by a wealthy patron to praise about the deeds of his patron or his patron's ancestors. So basically, it was more or less the same job as historians in the Middle Ages. Whatever the wealthy patron wants to be sang for ages to come, it's the bard's job to sing it, even if it's a lie. The history of kings and nobles was made by what they wished to be true. The truth was whatever they wanted to be true. Bards were also musicians and composed their own pieces, which was dangerous because the moment a noble pays for his deeds to be sang, everyone who heard it would believe it. But if for some reason the noble displeased the bard, maybe stopped paying or didn't give the agreed amount, the bard could compose something against his patron, and everyone would believe the songs because supposedly the truth was in the tip of the bard's tongue. And the reputation of the noble would be completely destroyed. These poems and songs were not just performed in royal courts, but every possible place, from small villages, markets, taverns and inns. And cutting off a bard's tongue wasn't stopping him from telling lies. It was an indication that real truths wanted to be covered up. But aside from all of that, the bards also memorized myths, legends and the history of the ancestors, ancient traditions, and, well, to facilitate the memorization of such works, they often used rhymes. And thanks to these oral traditions, we nowadays know much about the doings of our ancestors, their tales, legends, myths, and heroic deeds. This is also why it was important for a bard to be a warrior or somehow participate in a battle or any kind of conflict. If he had been there, surely the material from his compositions about such events had to be true because he experienced it. But of course, a little bit of romance here and there and a drop of fantasy makes it sound even better. As they often say, they don't put in the songs how they all shit themselves in a battle. The bardic tradition was maintained till late in the British Isles, so at a certain moment in history, bards and shops were around at the same time. A shop was a poet, or at least a reciter of poetry, but not all shops would have composed their own poetry. Many of them would be performing some sort of service while traveling through the land and singing the songs they had learned here and there. Popular songs, rhymes, folk tales and poems, but there were certain shops who were permanently attached to the royal court. Shops are from the Anglo-Saxon tradition, practically with the same functions as a bard, but often memorizing and reciting the deeds of the ancient Germanic pagans, reminding Anglo-Saxon kings about their origins and ancestry. The shop was an oral poet. However, there is little information about shops. There aren't even indications that shops composed music to accompany their poems, so it seems to have had fewer activities than the bard had. And while the shop progressively started to be more attached to the Anglo-Saxon royalty and noble houses, the bard started to be more nomadic, on his own, composing his own stuff and performing in all sorts of places. So there was a huge exchange of positions between the bards and the shops when the Anglo-Saxon political power was installed in England and replaced certain Celtic traditions. And because there was always that legendary enmity between the English and the Irish and the Scots, bards became more common in Ireland and Scotland and shops in England. Now, take the case of Beowulf, for instance. I'm sure you have all read that at least once. Beowulf was recited long before it was first recorded in parchment by medieval poets, by the shops. The northern Germanic tribes of Beowulf relied on shops and bards to tell the fantastic tales of brave heroes throughout the years until eventually someone decided to write the story down. But the problem with Beowulf and such other tales is that it is a mystery as to whether Beowulf actually existed. Each storyteller told the tale differently, and certain details would have changed with time to accompany the political and religious realities of their time. Shops and bards were also masters in improvising, so there is also that factor. Whenever something fails the memory, just add something the audience will enjoy. During the time of Beowulf, Germanic tribes had not yet been introduced to Christianity, yet today's versions of Beowulf have loads of Christian ideals. This is likely due to the influence of the anonymous poet who wrote the tale, just like what happened with Snorri Sturluson. Without a doubt, he is still one of the best sources to know about Norse myths and certain traditions, but there is a lot of Christian influence in his work. Not only due to he himself being a Christian, but the society he lived in was Catholic. Suffice to say, these poets provided entertainment for the tribesmen who gathered in meadows by chanting and singing about legends of the past. Tribal warriors held a great deal of respect for both bards and shops, as it was them who would immortalize the warriors for their heroic deeds for ages to come. A man dies, but his deeds will never be forgotten. Alright, let's finish this video with Skalds, which some believe they are the Norse equivalent of the Anglo-Saxon shops. But unlike shops, many Skalds have names and they became historical people. Generally, a skald is a poet who performed at Scandinavian courts for leaders, nobles and kings during the Viking Age and the Icelandic Middle Ages. And just like the shops, there are no evidences that skalds incorporated in their performances any musical instrument. Much of the Skald's works were testimonies of heroic deeds, great battles, the life and history of kings, etc. Skalds became the main source of Icelandic and Norse history and culture, as it was the Skalds who learned and shared oral history, even the deeds of the gods themselves. Skalds progressively gained prominent positions in the Norse society. Wealthy patrons needed a skald in their courts constantly, not just to perform at a certain occasion or entertain at a meadow. Mostly it was to record every little detail of the history of his patron, mostly kings, to ensure that the legacy of that person lived on. So the skald's profession is much closer to that of an historian, only that instead of writing down events, skalds kept everything in their heads. But speaking of writing down, the first Norse written artifacts come from skalds. They knew how to read and write, and because of this, some skalds became clerical workers, recording laws and all sorts of things belonging to the government's activities. Some skalds were even elected to the Thing and the Althing, the sort of parliament of the Old Norse society. It's very interesting to see how rapidly the skald became an important figure in the Norse society and occupied positions of power. We have hints that the Skalds had also been warriors, but that occupation was rapidly put aside. For instance, in the poem Lokasenna, there is a clear critique to Skalds. Loki points out that Bragi, the god of poetry, eloquence, and the patron of Skalds, does nothing but talk and recite verses, that he is all words but no actual deeds. No warrior spirit left in Bragi. It's interesting because whoever composed Lokasenna was a Skald and most likely a warrior as well, and he was probably criticizing the Skalds of his time, who were becoming poets and clergymen, and were no longer warriors. And this had a great impact on the Old Norse society, because Skalds started to work with churches to record the lives and miracles of saints, along with passing on the ideals of Christianity. Skalds became the main agents of the Christian culture when they began glorifying and passing on Christianity over the old pagan beliefs. So it wasn't just Snorri Sturluson. The Poetic Edda is a compilation of oral poems which have been in the Norse oral tradition since times immemorial. But when they had been put to parchment, it was done by Christians. And even before that, when such poems still belonged to the oral tradition, they had already been tampered with by Christian skalds. You see, kings had been the first ones to adopt Christianity, and for a skald to have success in court, they had to put aside pagan beliefs, and so the poems changed a lot. And Snorri Sturluson himself used materials from the Poetic Edda to compose his prose Edda, while adding even more Christian ideals. So skalds were great because it's because of them we know much about the Old Norse societies, but they made things difficult by mixing non-pagan traditions and beliefs, which makes it even harder to identify the real pagan mind of the Old Norse societies. So, Mrs. Teresa and Mr. Glenn Hallen, I hope I have answered your question. Thank you for your support, and also a very special thanks to all of you who are right there watching this video and for supporting my work. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video, and as always, tack för idag.